Hello, property investors. Welcome back to another session of our facilities management and utilities management focus. Those of you who joined us last time, you would have been part of part one, and we're moving into part two, focusing on the idea of utilities management, specifically on water management. So if you didn't manage to join us for part one, I suggest go and look in our YouTube channels, look under the live videos, and see if you can find part one and rewatch that one. And then we're moving into today where we're talking about part two, still on the idea of managing your water on your properties. So the highlight from part one was really this idea of training your tenants or building good habits in your tenants. And the biggest value add that we have for you as far as building good habits in your tenant is to make sure that your tenants are paying for their water. Again, this idea that if you get something for free, you don't respect it, you don't manage it, you don't look after it, you abuse it. So the first thing for you to do is make sure that your tenants are paying for their water. They're not getting it for free. The habit that we have as landlords is to try and find a tenant quickly and easily. So we kind of get tempted to do our rent as a all-inclusive price, so where it includes water, because then it becomes less of a burden for you as the landlord to have to charge the tenant or have to put in meters so that the tenant can be charged. So really going to reiterate this idea that we have to take control of our properties completely. So, and one of the most important places is making sure that your tenants pay for what they actually use. So if you are already charging your rent with water included, it's not too late. Go back to your tenant and say, listen, I know our original agreement said X and it included the water. We're now moving away from that program because it's not feasible for me to continue in that way. I will give you X amount discount, which was what I had as far as a budget for fair usage on the water. So instead of you paying, as an example, 5,000 Rand a month for rent, you're now only going to pay 4,500, but you're going to pay for the water yourself on the property. So it will be 4,500 plus any water that you consume while you're on the property. And I think so again, that needs to happen in writing. Have the discussion with the tenant, tell them what's coming up, give it to them in writing, have it as an addendum to the lease so they don't have any legs to stand on to fight with you. You're justifying it correctly, you're giving them something, and then you're adding on the charge on top of that. So that really is the starting point. Charge tenants for what they use. And to be honest, I wouldn't go down this journey without putting in a prepaid meter. So for me, the idea of sending them bills every month for their water just becomes an administration nightmare, where you've got to have someone go and read the water meter on the property. You've got to then say, what was the closing reading last month? What is the reading this month? Subtract the reading from last month and go, okay, well, this is what you used this month. Send them an invoice, wait for them to pay for that invoice. Often they have budgeted for their rent, but they haven't budgeted for their utilities at the end of the month. So then they go, oh, please can I have a week or two? And that just becomes such a big headache for you. So for me, it's a no-brainer. Put a prepaid water meter in from the start. And then what that means is it's automated. The tenant buys whatever water they need in advance of what they're going to use, and then they manage it. So and I think that is the big learning for me around prepaid meters is when we've already got into this establishment of they respect the water because they're paying for the water. Now it just steps it up a higher degree. So it just takes it to another level where they are focused on, listen, I put 100 Rand in yesterday. Oh, we've used that 100 Rand up already today. Please, speak to the family. You guys are wasting water. So they start to manage their water better. All of us are aware that the country's in a very, very bad state from water management perspective. There's lots of municipalities that are going through water shedding at the moment. So it's responsible for us to put in place methods for our tenants to conserve water. The same thing's going to happen from the water shedding perspective is that the tariffs are going to become more expensive for those who use too much water. So for us, it's very important to make sure and we're giving the tools to the tenants to manage their water. So what they're able to do when they're paying up front, they're then able to start budgeting. They then focus internally and they go, okay, listen, family, we need to manage our water better. Let's not waste water. Let's not leave taps running. Let's not leave toilets running. So that is another way of changing the habits for your tenants. And then they start budgeting better for their water. Instead of the other way around, as I touched on in part one, where your tenants come to you at the end of the month and they go, oh no, that bill's super high for the water. It's not my fault that the water's so much. It's your fault, Mr. Landlord, because the toilet's leaking. You need to come fix your toilet, Mr. Landlord. Whereas the opposite happens when it's prepaid. They go, hey, Mr. Landlord, please can you send a plumber to come fix the toilet? It's leaking. I'm losing money because it's wasting water. So that happens so quickly, which is one of my favorite things about doing prepaid meters. So I really recommend installing a prepaid meter and then reach out to us at SAPIN-Prepaid for your prepaid water meters. And I'll have the discussion with you personally, and we try and put in place the right solution for you. So moving on to what we're focusing on today, and it's really a little bit more of an addition to this water savings program. So we've touched on the fact that the prepaid water meter helps to reprogram people's minds around how they look after their water, how they manage water. And it really is that idea of when I'm responsible, I take responsibility. So that for me is the first big step towards it. And then what you start doing on top of that is looking at the size of your cistern on your toilets. So a lot of the old style low level toilets, so what that is the cistern sits on the wall, and then there's that big nasty pipe that's on the back of the cistern that drops down. You can see it. It goes into the back of the toilet and allows them to flush. So those tanks are huge on those low level flush systems. So, and what happens is you're wasting so much water in the size of that tank. Whereas the more modern toilets have got smaller tanks, they're more efficient on their flush. So for me, that's a good starting point. Look at reducing the size of your systems. If you're in the process of doing any renovations of bathrooms, pay attention to that, because that will save you water long term. And then the other side to things is when we're thinking in the bathroom, look at your taps. I find that mixer taps work very well as opposed to the normal taps that we generally had years gone past. And so what's nice about the mixer tap is it's very convenient for someone to just open it, close it. Whereas on a screw style tap, it takes them a while to screw it closed. And when someone's washing their hands, it's a little bit of an effort to screw that closed and then wash your hands and then open it again and rinse your hands. So those mixer style taps with the flapper handle, those are very good for saving water. So what your tenant or what people tend to do is they put soap on their hands, wash their hands, open the tap, rinse their hands, close the tap. Same way, open the tap, wet their hands, close the tap, put soap on their hands, wash their hands, open the tap. So that happens automatically and people start being conscious of saving water. Okay, so those are two very good tips that I find that you can do straight away in the bathroom at a fairly low cost, but you should be thinking of that when you're doing any renovations. The same with that mixer style tap in your shower. That what's nice about that is tenants then are able to obviously turn off water when they're soaping themselves down, turn on water when they're rinsing themselves off. So it just becomes very convenient to on off as far as the water goes, as opposed to someone who's now, they wet themselves, they got to screw those taps closed, lather themselves up with soap, screw those taps closed, open again, try and reset the temperature, and then rinse themselves off. So that ends up becoming a case of, well, it's such a headache to screw close, screw open, I'm just going to leave the tap running all the time. Versus on a mixer style, you can set your temperature in the position, and then all you're doing is wet yourself, close, push that lever in again, soap yourself up, pull that lever out, it's still at the same temperature, rinse yourself off, close. So there again, like you save water big time on a solution like that. And then there becomes bigger ways and solutions to save on your water. So the next one up for me is reviewing where your geysers are positioned in your properties. So there's two elements to the geyser. Obviously, there's an energy consumption to heat that water up. And then there's obviously the water consumption that fills that geyser. The water then flows from the geyser. What tends to happen is if your geyser is on one end of the property and your bathroom's on the other end of the property, what ends up happening is the water that's in the pipes stays in the pipes the whole time. And that water will cool off because it's not insulated, it's in the pipes, it's not in the geyser. That water will cool off. So when the tenant or when someone opens a tap on the other side of the building, they've got to drain all the cold water out of that pipe before the hot water starts to flow through the pipe. And that first couple of liters of water, unless it's someone who's water saved a bucket that they're busy saving that first little bit of cold water, most times that water just goes straight down the drain. It's potable water, it's super clean water. There's nothing wrong with that water. It's just that it's cold. The tenant or the person is looking for hot water at that tap. So if you bring the geyser closer to where the taps are, then there's less water in the pipes that has to flow out. So you save water in that way. Likewise, you want to look at your positioning of your kitchen to your bathrooms. You obviously want to have the best economy as far as whether it's closer to the spaces that use more water or whether it's halfway between. So you need to review that sort of thing. If you've got a bigger house that it's not possible to sort of balance that and you're losing liters between those taps on the cold, like while you're draining out the cold water, then it's worth looking at a recirculating system. So if your plumbers are very well skilled, they'll be able to put in a recirculating pump. And what that will do is that will circulate the water through the pipes all the time. So, and basically what it means is as close as possible to your tap, there's hot water already circulated through the pipes. It's going through the pipes, past where your taps are, going back around and into the geyser again, out of the geyser and around. So it means that those pipes are kept warm all the time. You need to then insulate those pipes so that you're not losing the heat from the tap all the time. So that solution makes sense in a place like a multi-let or a block of buildings where there's a shared boiler for the building and you want to reduce the wastage of that cold water, but you also have people using water quite frequently, so that water can then circulate and be available hot pretty much straight away at the taps. So that's a good solution that I look at. So those are ways to sort of start saving on water. The benefit of reducing how much water is flowing out of your geyser and how much is wasted in that cool spot on your piping means you're also saving on electricity. That's not heating up water unnecessarily. So other ways to save on water, and I talk to a lot of our investors around multi-let properties. Very often what we do as an investor is we buy a bigger single family home and we convert that into multi-let. To do that, as a single family home, normally it's set up for a family who's going to be looking after the whole property. They're going to be washing their own cars. They're going to be watering the garden, that sort of thing. But in a multi-let environment, you now have multiple tenants responsible for the whole property. So what often happens is we end up leaving those garden taps in the garden. And something I want you to be aware of is that becomes a place that people then use that water to wash cars. They maybe, and it's a good thing if you've got tenants who are conscious about the upkeep of the garden, because that keeps the equity value of your property up if the garden looks beautiful all the time. So maybe they're watering the garden with that potable water. So this is a place that there's room for savings. I really advise to people if they are billing each of their tenants in a multi-let or in a block of flats, that sort of thing, that they shouldn't have garden taps, because what's going to happen is the tenant's going to fill up a bucket at the free garden tap instead of through their prepaid meter in their unit. So for me, I suggest take the garden tap out. Okay. Now, if you still need a solution for watering the gardens or washing cars, it doesn't need to be potable water. It doesn't need to be drinking water. So a JoJo from Rain Collection is first price for that sort of thing. So having a water container to capture rainwater is a big water saving solution. So, and then that water is used for things like washing cars, things like washing watering the garden. You can upgrade your plumbing system to have that water go to flushing toilets. So flushing toilets is a big one. So anywhere where it's not needed as drinking water, some people will filter that water and take it through to being your laundry water, washing clothes, that sort of thing. There's nothing wrong with the rainwater. There's no toxins in it at all. So the idea then is to make sure your roof is clean, that it's clean water going into the storage tank, and then just filtering that slightly. So it's not drinkable water filtered, but it's ideal for using on those grey water spots like your toilets and like your laundry. And that's a great way to save water on the property. So you're reusing a resource like the rainwater. A lot of people go into the process of boreholes. The nice thing about boreholes is obviously you're off grid for that, and you're using that. But I think the big thing to bear in mind is that water isn't going to be there forever. So it's not unlimited. We have to respect that resource in the water tables. So you need to look at what the impact of that water is. That water table might run dry, that aquifer might run dry in the future, which means that water supply is at risk. So you need to have a bit of a backup when it comes to borehole water. Also, there's obviously a huge expense in drilling the well. There's also a huge expense in the fact that you don't know how deep that well needs to be to get to the aquifer. And then also you have to have that water tested. And I would suggest having it tested frequently, even after your first test come back good, that it is good potable water, because who knows what happens to contaminate that aquifer in the future, whether you're close to a mine, whether there's some kind of contamination from industry in the area. So I think that's something to bear in mind. But it is a great solution for you to have that backup on water. Okay. Then I look at wanting to touch on the idea of what we're currently going through as a country as far as water shedding goes. And it's something to be very aware of, that what tends to happen as a result of this water shedding is there's high risk of damage to infrastructure in your property and in the area of your property. So that's where obviously the water is turned off in a specific area. So that area runs dry for a couple of hours, and then they allow water to distribute to another area. So they force people to reduce consumption in the area by running the pipes dry, and then they reintroduce the water back to that area later. So that's the concept of water shedding. The reason for it is to save water, reduce the consumption throughout the city. So unfortunately, what happens is when those pipes run dry, everyone opens the taps, there's no water, so they end up basically filling those pipes with air. Everyone closes those taps, and then what happens is when the water is turned on by the municipality, that air is still in the pipes. It's got nowhere to go, so all water rushes in and it squeezes that air, and it creates high pressure with air, and the pipes aren't designed to handle that high pressure of air. And what that then ends up doing is it ends up bursting pipes. It ends up breaking water meters. It ends up breaking fittings, that sort of thing. So it's something to be aware of in that situation. The other thing and there was a recent carte blanche episode on it, is that air in the system running past your municipality meter is going to make the municipality meter turn, and the meter isn't designed for the viscosity of air, it's designed for the viscosity of water, which means that meter will spin faster with the air going past it than it does with water. So unfortunately, people end up paying for air in those situations. So something to be conscious of and to keep an eye on. Okay. The other very important thing that I want you to be aware of when it comes to this kind of setup where the pipes run dry is if your geyser isn't installed correctly with what they call a non-return valve. So it means the water can only go from the cold supply into the geyser, and it can't come back down the cold supply into the piping again. So they put a non-return valve in, which means the water can only go one way. It can't come this way again. So the plumber should be installing that non-return valve into your piping. If they don't install that, then what happens is, because your geyser is often higher up in the roof, it now becomes this great storage tank that your tenant goes, oh, the cold water is run dry, but if I open the hot water tap, there's still water coming out of that. Let me use the hot water. And they run that geyser dry, which in itself isn't a problem, but the problem is no one thinks to go and turn off the geyser on the DB, and that water, that geyser is still trying to heat up water that isn't there, which ends up cooking the element in your geyser. So it's the same way that if you've got an empty kettle running, it's going to damage that kettle. So the element in your geyser, if it's got no water in the geyser, it's going to cook that element, it's going to burn it, and now you end up having to replace that geyser element. Okay, so that's one risk to it. The other risk to it is now you have, again, that air pressure build up in the geyser, which can then result in failure of that geyser in the future. So it's important to make sure that you've got that non-return valve on the geyser, so as the water doesn't get drained out of the geyser unnecessarily, and you don't have the extra risk of the geyser bursting or you cooking that element. Okay, and then the last little bit of information that I really suggest that people do from a property management perspective is to do water readings on your property frequently. So I suggest at least once a week, have someone just take a photo of the water meter with the reading on the water meter, and just pay attention, put it into a spreadsheet and go, okay, my average consumption is 5 kiloliters a week. It means for the month, it's 20 kiloliters for the month. Then at least you're paying attention to anything that goes wrong, anything that's out of the conventional, anything that's not part of the pattern. Suddenly in 1 week, you've got a usage of, instead of 5 kiloliters, it's 20 kiloliters. That then raises the red flag, and you go, okay, there's potentially a water leak on the property. We need to go and investigate and fix that. So I really encourage you to do water reads once a week on the municipality meter. So that allows you to check the pattern on your consumption on the property. It prevents any of these surprises, because if that pipe is burst at the beginning of the month and you only receive your statement at the end of the month, that's when you're going to find out through the shock of an expensive municipality bill, instead of you finding out a week later and being able to repair it quickly, and it minimizes your loss. So I really suggest that as a way of managing your property. Again, my first prize on properties is putting in a prepaid meter. So if you want to look into that, reach out to me at SAPIN-Prepaid. My contact details will be on the website in the description, and I'm here to help you as property investors. So reach out to me. Let me see if I can help you on the right solution going forward. Thank you very much. We'll see you at the next one.